In Arizona, 18 people are facing charges in connection with an alleged fake elector scheme to try to overturn the 2020 presidential election results. There are 11 alleged fake electors and 7 other defendants whose names were redacted from the indictment. But we do know former White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows and former Trump lawyers Rudy Giuliani and John Eastman are part of that group based on descriptions in court papers. CBS News election law contributor David Becker joins us now for more analysis. So, David, explain to our viewers what's at stake in this indictment and just how serious are these charges?
Yeah, so this is the 4th state to indict fake electors and others who were working to organize them, joining Georgia, Michigan, and Nevada. All of these charges were indictments came down through grand juries, citizens sitting in judgment of these things. And we have to remember that this was not just some play acting of electors that occurred in December of 2020. This was part of a scheme in many states to come up with these fake slates of electors that would then be sent to Washington and give some kind of false justification to members of Congress who might then want to dismiss electoral votes for a candidate they didn't prefer on January 6th when they were supposed to just be counting those electoral votes. By the time the electors met, the election had been certified in every single state. Dozens of court cases had been brought. No evidence was found of any kind of fraud that would overturn the result at all, not even close to it, even at that time. And now, as we sit here 3.5 years, that's still been the case. We still haven't seen any evidence of anything that would have overturned the results of the 2020 presidential election.
So some of these individuals, lawyers involved in this scheme at one time or another may have called themselves Donald Trump's lawyers or advisors to the president or something along those lines. He is listed as an unindicted co-conspirator in this case. Are there any potential legal consequences for him?
Well, there could be. I mean, there could be indictments that come later. There's clearly perhaps testimony that could come about him or even from him that would be relevant in this case. But this clearly gets very close to the former president. These are people like John Eastman, people like Boris Epshteyn, people like Mark Meadows, who had his ear, who we know were meeting with him in the days after the 2020 election, all the way up until the inauguration. So, and as we've learned over time, as more and more details of these investigations have come out, thanks to indictments in places like Georgia and the January 6th investigation led by the special counsel here in D.C., we're learning more and more about how there appears to be coordination that occurred in the White House and in the group of people surrounding the former president to organize these fake elector slates, to get them to sign what looked like official documents claiming they were the duly elected electors, which they were not, and then to ultimately use that as a justification on January 6th to have members of Congress object to electoral votes in states that President Biden won, and ultimately perhaps create chaos or throw the election to the United States House of Representatives.
So how does this case compare to, you mentioned other states, how does it compare to the election interference cases in other states, for example, Georgia?
Well, Georgia's a little different because, of course, the former president is actually indicted in Georgia. In the other states, that's not the case. It's very, very similar. It appears it's very early. We don't know exactly what evidence that might be specific to Arizona is coming out here. The other cases are farther along, Georgia certainly being farther along, and Michigan probably right after that. So we'll have to see how that evidence gets played out in those cases. And it may very well be that the evidence in those cases is relevant to cases that come later, like in Arizona, because so much of this doesn't involve just what's happening, for instance, in Phoenix, but what's happening in Washington and elsewhere to coordinate some of these fake elector schemes.
Before we let you go, as you know, a big day at the Supreme Court. Supreme Court is going to be listening to arguments about the former president's immunity claim in relation to attempting to stop the election. Tell us more, or the results of the election. Tell us more about what sort of arguments we can expect to hear today.
Yeah, I think first and foremost, the former president is going to make claims that the president just has some kind of blanket immunity, that he can't be charged with crimes committed while in office. This is a fairly radical idea. I don't think anyone really believes that the Supreme Court is going to take up that idea, that the president is above the law for all intents and purposes. And of course, we have to remember, in nearly 250 years of the presidency, no president has ever really claimed that. President Nixon, who could have been charged with crimes, was pardoned by Gerald Ford, which wouldn't have been necessary had he been immune from criminal prosecution. And even Donald Trump's lawyers in the impeachment in February of 2021 argued very clearly that senators could vote to acquit on the impeachment because former President Trump could still be charged with crimes and held accountable for his actions. So even Trump's lawyers said that. Now, I think what we might get down into is whether or not presidents can be immune from prosecution for acts that fall within the umbrella of their official responsibilities. And that might be where this case comes out. But I think it's also important to note that the presidency has no official duties with regard to an election, particularly an election in which the president himself is running. And a federal court has already held that when he did things like organize fake electors, if he did them allegedly, or when he made the call to Secretary Raffensperger in Georgia, that he was acting in his capacity as a candidate, not as the president of the United States.
David Becker, thank you very much.